So I'd like to welcome all of you to our Assuring Quality, Integrity, and Credibility session. We'll be speaking with members of the CAEP Board of Directors. Before we get started, I have been asked to remind everyone about the app and that you're able to follow the session on the app. We will be asking questions of the panelists. However, I'll be monitoring the app if any of you have questions that you would like posed as well. And then also make sure as we get to the end of the session that you actually complete the session ratings. So I would like to get us started by asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves. I'll start with myself really quick. I'm Rhea Steele. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Council for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation. I've been with the organization about 2.5 years now. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves by letting us know who they are, where they are at, what category of representation they have on our board, as well as how long they've been on the board.
Good morning. I'm Karen Sims Gallagher. I'm the Dean of the University of Southern California's Rossier School of Education. I represent teacher educators on the board, and I've been on the board about 1.5 years.
Hi, I'm Kim Walters-Parker. I'm a reading specialist at Woodford County High School in Versailles, Kentucky. I'm the chair of the Accreditation Council, and I've been on the board for 2 years.
I'm Dr. Maria del Carmen Salazar. I am an associate professor at the University of Denver. I'm a board member. I'm representing teacher educators, and I've been on the board for 1 year as well.
My name is Dr. Al Rabanera. I'm a high school math educator out of Fullerton, California. I'm on the board of directors, and I'm representing teachers. Oh, and I've been on it for 1 year.
Hi, my name's Chris Cook, and I am the president of CAEP. I'm a former chief state school officer for 8 years in Illinois, former teacher, former state director of special education. I've been on the board since 2013, served as vice chair, representing the state agency at that time.
Yeah, we'll do that one going.
So before we jump into questions and answers and getting the panelists' perspectives, I wanted to give all of you a brief overview of the governance structure of CAEP as an organization. So the organization actually has 3 distinct governing bodies that function independently from one another. The Board of Directors is the first one, and we'll come back to that one in a second. The Accreditation Council, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with in the organization, they're responsible for making the decisions related to accreditation, also verifying whether policies are followed, and then managing complaints, and then also just ensuring that we have a high integrity process for accreditation. The Appeals Council, also a separate governing body, is called when an institution has an adverse decision and would like that decision reviewed. So that is, oftentimes that body does not come together because there haven't been very many appeals, but that is the third governing body. Does anybody have any questions about that before we talk a little bit more about the Board of Directors? All right.
Okay, I'm going to give you a brief overview, and then certainly once we're done with each of our talking, more than happy to answer questions. First of all, the board has the fiduciary responsibility for the organization. We stand separate from the accreditation process. There is intentional overlap, however, between the Board of Directors and the Accreditation Council through the Accreditation Council's officer roles. And what that means is Kim, who happens to be the chair of the Accreditation Council, is a non-voting member of the Board of Directors. So she is at our meetings.
Backward.
Pardon me.
Non-voting member of the Accreditation Council.
Yes, pardon me, I said that wrong. She is a non-voting member of the accreditation. Yes, because you, but she is a voting member of the board, and she is appointed to be chair of the Accreditation Council as by the Board of Directors. There's a vice chair of the Accreditation Council who is David Rock, and he is a voting member of the Accreditation Council, but a non-voting member of the board. And was elected by the accreditation counselors, those who make up the Accreditation Council. And we can go into why the bylaws made that distinction if you want to have that discussion. The board also has responsibilities for reviewing and adopting any revised standards. And this review process will begin in the coming year. We review and adopt a strategic plan, which we did about a year ago. And the plan was refreshed last year and can be found on our website. And then also, we are stewards of the organization. So we have oversight over the activities, finances, and performance of CAEP as an organization, and the Accreditation Council. However, we are not involved in any accreditation decisions. That is, if you wanted to appeal something through the Accreditation Council had done, you would not come to the Board of Directors, you would go to the review. And probably the most important thing from my perspective is that the Board of Directors hires and evaluates the CEO. So I think we all know the leadership is really, really important. I'm pleased that Chris is our CEO, but that's something the board hired him, and then we, once a year, we evaluate his performance.
All right, so let's get into the fun stuff. So the first question I have for the panelists is, why is accreditation important to the field of educator preparation? And Karen, if we can start with you.
I can think of 3 reasons. I know there are more, but first of all, I think that we talk the same language when we have an accreditation. We have the standards and the review process. You heard a little bit this morning about different terms we use, but we are trying to use, and we do use the same language. And that means that that's a way in which we can then demonstrate through evidence of what we're doing. I think that when you look at sort of standard 4 about evidence, unless you have a common language, it is very difficult to try to demonstrate to the level that we need for the Accreditation Council to look at that we are meeting those standards. Secondly, the standards are research-based. There was a separate commission that created the standards. How long did that take? That was before I joined the board. A couple of years. So when the NCAEP and TEAC boards voted themselves out of existence, we created CAEP. Then there was the really important task made up of a large group of experts in many areas that created the 5 standards we now have. And those were based on research. Now, I think many of them probably seemed intuitive to many of us who've been involved in teacher preparation. But being able to demonstrate through research, another form of evidence, where these standards came from, I think is an important reason why having accreditation is important. And then the last is sharing with one another. And by sharing with one another, that means not just those of us in higher ed or in teacher preparation, but with our K-12 partners, whether that's at the building level or at the district level. It's our policymakers at the state level. It's in the community, parents, and other community members. So I think that while there were always examples of EPPs working with community-wide, CAEP really reinforces the need to talk to one another in order for us to prepare the most effective teachers. Yeah. Anyone else want to add to that?
I'd like to Just give you a concrete example from our own educator prep program. So we just got accredited in October at the University of Denver, one of the happiest days of my life, by the way. And we had never been accredited before, nationally accredited. We had never gone after TIAC or NCATE. And the reason that we hadn't is because it had been proposed to me. I was the former director of the program as well. And I just saw it as a system of inputs. I really couldn't see the value added. And so the reason that we decided to go after CAEP accreditation was our dean supported it first and foremost, but also we were able to see the value added. So the value added that I personally saw is that it moved our program more toward data-driven decision making, but also toward impact, really looking at the impact of our program. So this focus on developing a systematic approach, this focus on data, this focus on impact is what I was really looking for, and that spoke to me. And I wanted to use that and leverage that to move our focus on equity. So I saw a bigger reason to really approach CAEP accreditation in this way. How does that relate to the field? I think it has moved the field in quite a different way. So we are at the most accredited college at the University of Denver. We have psychology in our program, so APA accreditation. We have many, many accreditors in our college. I see a big distinction in the way we approach accreditation to the way my colleagues approach accreditation, and that is that data-driven and impact approach. So for me, there's a lot of value added in the process, and I think it's pushed the field, and it will push actually other fields, I think, in a very positive way as well.
You know, when I came on to CAEP as the perspective of the state, so I want to offer that version here, there was a number of reasons. One is that we were basically pursuing the same standards that CAEP was doing as a state, but it's much harder to do from a state perspective without outside verification. So oftentimes, and you're seeing this now in this country, there's pushback on teacher shortages in the wrong direction of, oh, we need to make things easier, we're going to put in provisional teachers, this or that. So when you're trying to hold the line on quality from a chief state school officer position, it was nice and would be nice, I thought, having an outside accreditor around the same standards to verify that. So when you go before the General Assembly and you testify as these bills are being proposed, there's another narrative there around why this is important. So part of why I came on to CAEP as the board and part of why I think accreditation brings is that outside verification. Another reason it was important to me as a state is that our resources were being cut every day. Not that that's happening in any other states in the union, but I assure you state departments of education are not heavily funded. So for me to replicate some sort of in-state verification process among institutions in that state wasn't cost effective, where I could rely on an outside accreditor for basically doing a similar review with outsiders of Illinois. It made a lot of sense for us, and that's why I was interested in pursuing that, why it made so much sense from the state perspective.
Before I went back to classroom teaching 3 years ago, I was the director of educator preparation for the state of Kentucky, and I would echo a lot of what Chris said, that it gives a way to communicate to people who have an interest in educator preparation, but only in providing their opinions, perhaps, rather than their actual expertise. And I think it's important for all of the P12 professions to demonstrate that we can govern ourselves, that our profession can govern itself. I mean, most of you guys have been teachers at some point, and you know everyone perceives himself or herself to be an expert because they went to school and they know so much about it, and if you would only teach like this, it'd be so much better. And this accreditation provides a bit of credibility to say this is what actual educators with experience and educator preparation backgrounds say will help us have effective teachers. And that's, you know, it's a far cry from, again, as Chris referenced, just saying, well, you know, this person's pretty smart and has a degree in biology, so I think she's going to be a fine biology teacher tomorrow with a classroom full of children. And the challenge of that is we have to accept that responsibility and demonstrate that we're willing to accept that and take it seriously. Otherwise, the public won't take it seriously either, and we will find ourselves without that bit of protection from people who think you can just walk in because you're smart and be a great teacher.
I'm going to be echoing a lot of what these people up here are saying, because at a time when policymakers are ignoring solid research on the crucial importance of extended clinical practice before a teacher candidate becomes a teacher of record. We need an accreditor to take the best practice picture of what quality preparation includes, a vision developed by the profession itself. And we need to be the judge of that quality. Right? Any route into teaching should meet standards and the practitioner's review of a national accreditor using professional-driven standards.
So the next question I have for the panel is, why were you interested in becoming part of the board of directors for CAEP? And Al, we'll start with you for that one.
So as I was introduced as a high school math educator. So I have like 180 kids in front of me every day. I'm a product of, you know, an NCAEP accredited school. As an educator, I've had the opportunity to sit and be the chair of WASC Accreditation, like writing the report, and as the midterm chair, and also as a visiting member. I wanted the opportunity to see what it looked like, you know, on the national level when EPPs are being accredited, because CAEP needs to be representative of the expertise of actual PK through 12 practitioners. It's crucial that the CAEP board monitors and adjusts standards and processes and policies with the wisdom of PK through 12 lens at the table.
I've been in favor of a single accrediting body since I became a teacher educator, which is in the mid-'80s. And I've felt that having been through, I don't know how many of you have been in this, but we have gone over this a lot. And when finally CAEP was born, I thought it was really important to be part of that, to help. We're still we're really like 5 years old. So we're just like entering kindergarten if you think about our own development and learning. So I thought I really wanted to be part of that developmental process. And because I think we had a shaky beginning, and I think unfortunately many of us remember things about what was, and we don't often, sometimes we don't recognize we have developed beyond that. So I really felt it was important to join the board, to be part of both the board of directors and Chris's team to get CAEP to really be the preeminent accreditation, I think, of professional organizations, not just teacher ed, but of professional organizations.
I wanted to be part of the board because I found a home at CAEP, and that's really important as a person of color to say that when education is overwhelmingly white. That's something that I found at CAEP was people who are extremely committed to quality educators, but also committed to equity. And I always found that my message was not only accepted at CAEP, but fostered and promoted. And so that's something that I really wanted to be a part of in terms of setting policy, but also working with some really fantastic people who are really committed to making great teachers and great schools and providing equity for all students.
I would just add again, I'm going back to my original appointment to the board, not as when I was employed by CAEP and became in a different role, but from the perspective of a Chief State School Officer, when I wanted to be on the board was we were struggling with a lot of low-performing districts in our state and teachers who were unprepared. Basically, nationally, you still have about half of the students graduated from high school in this country not reading at the 8th grade level, which, and then this is concentrated in a number of school districts in the state. We started dialogue with our higher ed institutions in Illinois at the time to have difficult conversations about what could we do better around making sure, in particular, elementary teachers and teachers of students with disabilities, there were a lot of deficits in their preparation and their ability to do this work. When we intervened in some of the low-performing schools, we found that we had to start with superintendents and then principals and making sure the right leadership was there, and then in trying to recruit and foster the right skill sets among teachers who could be there. And one of my frustrations in one of the districts in Illinois that we'd worked with was releasing a number of teachers and then having them go across the border, and they were all hired by an urban school district without any reference check. And I called the state superintendent in the adjoining state and said, you know, it was Chris Nicastro at the time in Missouri, Chris, what's going on? Don't you guys have oversight over this district? And it's just a national problem. And it's one in which we had to work together. And what better place to do that than in a national accreditor? So that's very attractive to me, as CAEP accreditation is a leverage point in trying to ensure higher quality and a voice for that nationally. And I think that's one of the things that inspires me so much about the work and working with board members who care so deeply about this.
I would echo a lot of that and say that, you know, I started as a classroom teacher 30 years ago this year. This will be my last year as a classroom teacher, so this is a big exit for me. Only from the teaching part, not from the CAEP part or the, you know, educator preparation in general. But from the very beginning, it's very clear that you're implementing other people's ideas, and no matter how much freedom I have in the classroom, there have always been things that were controlling what I needed to do, other people's policies. And as I, throughout my career, have figured out who's really pulling the strings and what I need to do, I've tried to put myself in a position to influence that. And so when I went into the educator preparation realm and I found out, like, hey, who's really pulling the strings on this, I wanted to be more involved in it. And not everyone wants to do that. Not everyone wants to go to the meetings and do all of those things. But for those of us who do, I think it's important because we can influence so much. I mean, when you think about the footprint that CAEP has in educator preparation in the country, if I, as a classroom teacher, can influence that, or if I, as one EPP faculty member, can influence that, I wanted to take advantage of that opportunity. So, I mean, it is, you know, it's quite a bit of work and quite a bit of responsibility, but we get to do cool things like go to board dinners and stuff and get a pin and things. So, and it's, if you're interested in being more involved at the policy level, we have a lot of opportunities. We're always recruiting for people to take more responsibility. But I think we all recognize that not everyone wants to be involved at that level, and that's fine. You don't have to be to have an influence in the policies of CAEP. But I do think it's just important, like for someone like me, I've been a classroom teacher, I've worked at the state level, I've worked in an EPP, I have come from a family of educators. You know, first, I wanted to bring all of those different perspectives to the work that we do, because I'm the last person who wants somebody who hasn't actually done the job trying to regulate the job.
So the next question I have for the panel is, what about the work of the board has made you most proud? And Chris, we'll start with you.
Okay, there's two things I want to share about this. One is the composition of the board. I don't think we talk quite about that enough. So about half of the board represent prep program individuals. The other half are teachers, those who employ teachers. So I'm going to run through quickly just the other folks on the board, just so you get a sense of the types of folks. So our vice chair is Francis Skip Fennell, and he's with McDaniel College. Mary Kenfield, she serves as secretary of the board as a parent. Rebecca Pringle, she's with the National Education Association. David Rock has been mentioned. He's a dean of the University of Mississippi. Mary Brayback, a former dean of New York University. Barbara Cambridge, she's with the National Council of Teachers of English, one of those SPAs that you heard referenced in the opening. Jane Elsperman, who's the National Association of Secondary School Principals. Rick Ginsberg, University of Kansas. Rick, by the way, here is going to be coming. We're in his state, so I'm going to give him a hard time about that. Candace McQueen, she's the Chief State School Officer in Tennessee. Penny McRoy, so she's with the Licensure Board in the state of Georgia. Candy Olson, she was with Hillsborough County Public Schools. She was on their local board. Reyes Quezada, who's Dean at the University of San Diego. And then Mary Catherine Ricker, who's with the American Federation of Teachers. And Addie Washington, she's a teacher at Lincoln Middle School in Illinois. So I think that's something to be proud of. And I can tell you, both from the perspective of my prior role and certainly serving on the board, when you get these diverse folks around the table talking about policy, you get a rigorous debate, and they don't always agree. And I think that's a sign of a healthy board. And we've had those discussions. We've had them deeply around standards like Standard 3.2 in particular, and the pros and cons of that. And I really like the fact that the support of the standards that is generated around debate, authentic debate from different perspectives, is very, very healthy. It's healthy for teacher prep, it's healthy for this country, and they're not always easy. But I think that's something that I admire most about the board and the board members we have, in the willingness to have those conversations in support of high standards.
So what I'm most proud of is that CAEP is committed to the consistency and quality of on-site reviews by engaging virtually all of their site team members in extensive training, involving both review processes and the flexibility to allow for tremendous variation in how EPPs demonstrate that they are meeting the standards established by the field.
I would say that I'm proud of the focus on continuous improvement. From an EPP perspective, that can sometimes feel like a moving target, so I want to acknowledge that as well. But when you look at the big picture, and being on the board really helps you see that big picture around, CAEP is really focused on continuous improvement and always really questioning their own practices, getting feedback from the field, making adjustments, and I think that's a great model to work from as well.
I would agree completely. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is our willingness to practice what we preach in terms of trying to improve continuously, do things more effectively. I don't think that we have carved too many things in stone and said this can never possibly ever be changed. And increasing the transparency, for example, giving EPPs an opportunity to be involved in the initial panel review, which is new and not always perfect in the way it works out because there's technology involved and schedules and all that sort of thing. But little changes like that may seem small to us are really big if you're on the EPP side and haven't had that opportunity before, and you did feel like all of your reports and everything just went into some vacuum somewhere in a meeting room in DC, which is actually in Bethesda. And then people just did stuff with it, and then a decision came out, and it was almost anticlimactic. Like you were hoping it was going to be good, and then it was good, and it's like, well, okay, that's over. Now what? And engaging people in part of that process, I think, makes it a little bit clearer just how that works. And when we have our session about the Accreditation Council, something as simple as showing what the agenda is, I think helps people understand how that actually works and that there are a lot of real live people working on the other side. So I'm very proud of us for being willing to sort of open that and sort of pull the curtain back a little bit and show how we operate.
I'm going to go back to something that Chris alluded to. I'm proud that we developed the standards. They're rigorous standards, but as people looked at Standard 3 and particularly 3.2, is there anyone here from California besides Al and me? Okay, that caused a huge kerfuffle. Yeah, in California because I think that people thought. I think we weren't clear about it. So, I mean, the board could have said, tough, this is the standard, this is what we did, but we tried to understand what was it, particularly in California, and I'm sure there were other states, that was causing the problem. And when we came out, this happened before I got on the board, but when we came out with about a year ago, the 3.2 revision, it was an attempt to say there are multiple ways to meet this standard. There isn't just one way. And to help, because there are multiple ways that we prepare teachers. In California, I just heard last week, 98.9% of the teachers are prepared at the post-baccalaureate level. We do not have undergraduate teacher ed in the state of California. And that there's a whole history behind that, but when you looked at 3.2, it made the implicit assumption was that we were all doing it at the undergraduate level. So once we stepped back and realized that, then we were able to, I think, look at multiple ways in which you could meet that standard. And that is really, I think, the sign of a body that recognizes there is a standard, but that there isn't just one way to meet that standard.
Anyone else?
No, I mean the one. So we're on the one thing with the audience about CAEP accreditation, what would it be? It's not a gotcha process. So the very reason that we modified 3.2, as Karen was saying, we're not there to try to embarrass or humiliate programs. We're there, in the end, we want programs to have been reflective and to understand this is continuous improvement and helps them towards a high set of standards to become better. Really, that's it.
So wait, let me make sure we capture audio from audience questions. Here's this too.
Thank you. Oh, and I'm from Oregon, and I taught teacher ed in California, so I understand about 3.2. First, I'm going to preface this by saying don't take this personally, because I would ask this and expect this of any accreditation board or accountability board. You know, a lot of research in educational leadership, particularly the superintendent and the principal level, talks about a key disposition for leadership that's very important, and that's called arrogant humility. And I think that's very important to remember from the standpoint of an accrediting body. When I hear words from you guys, because I've been jotting them down, judge, credibility, preeminence, integrity, and ensure, CAEP seems to have the arrogant part of it down, okay? What do you do both from a structural piece within boardsmanship or however you do that, as well as from an engagement piece in ensuring your humility? Put in a more practical way, I think for EPPs, and I'm not an EPP, I'm a state level person. What do you do to recognize as an accrediting body that institutions and states don't serve CAEP, and that CAEP is there to serve the EPPs and the state institutions who are representatives of the citizenry of their states?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So one of the things we do is we put ourselves through rigorous process of recognition. So the Council for Higher Ed Accreditation, which recently just completed a review of us, we're doing the same things really that is required of CAEP of those who wish to be accredited. We have to demonstrate we're meeting all sorts of standards. We have to demonstrate we're meeting a certain level of transparency. We have to demonstrate our decisions are made consistently across and reliably across teams. So that process, which is reflective, is one in which we take seriously, that we meet, and that we're certainly constantly having to strive at. You know, the other thing we're doing constantly is evaluating our products and services. So we're trying to get feedback from folks about the experience, about these conferences, about what we're doing, and then taking that and putting it into use. We did a very thorough national study, Teacher Performance Analytics did it, before acting on 3.2. We surveyed all higher ed, our state partners. There were thousands of surveys that came in about that, and that revealed to us there was a lot of misunderstanding initially about that standard, about what CAEP was trying to do. And we made that available publicly. We talked to our partners about it. And we've had a lot of convenings that we've also done where we've listened, you know, at ACTE meetings, at our state partnership meetings, and where we're hearing feedback from what folks' experiences are. At the same time, we have to demonstrate, and those who recognize us require that we're treating folks consistently. Even though our states are very diverse, they do things quite differently, we still have to demonstrate a level of consistency. But those are some of the things that we do to try to retain the humility I think that you're referencing and talking about, and how we've tried to do that thoughtfully. It's a great question. You and Karen?
I also, two things. The first is that it's voluntary. CAEP accreditation is a voluntary, in California you can be accredited or not.
But in Oregon, now national accreditation.
Okay, but what I'm saying, that's not the case in all states. In fact, I don't know if, okay. So, you know, not even the majority do. It is, so in that sense, I think we have to demonstrate why you would want to be accredited in a place like California. And I also think that what will help us demonstrate that we our standards mean is if we do more research on so what. So these are standards, people who meet these standards, what is different? Well, how does that have an impact on the graduates from CAEP accredited versus those who aren't? Because in California, we have 19, right now I think it's 19 institutions are NCAED or TIAC accredited. We have yet to have our first institution go up. But we have, I believe it's close to 70 institutions, public, CSU, UCs, and then 27 private. So we are not anywhere near, even half there. So I think we have to do the research that demonstrates, not just because we think, if we're part of CAEP, this is important, but really, what difference does it make? It not only, and where we can't demonstrate it, we'll have to think about, what does that mean? But it also will help us be able to talk to legislators who think because of the shortage, all it takes is a baccalaureate degree in a subject matter. And in California, we went through that before in the late 90s. But can we demonstrate that? Perhaps not to the level of satisfaction. So I think that people, or policymakers in particular, it's not just enough to say, hey, these are rigorous standards. It's like, so what?
I'm a high school teacher, so I get lessons in humility every single day from lots and lots of kids. My largest class is 48, and they can lay it on me pretty hard. But I think what keeps me and what I think sort of I try to bring to what we do is, that's really who we work for. We're really supposed to be working for kids in classrooms, across the board, P12. And the profession is teacher, principal, superintendent, whoever that may be. And so I think it's really important for us to always be responsive, not only to EPPs, but to what the field is telling us they need. And if we ever get to the point that we aren't agile enough to respond to that in a way that meets their needs, then I think we've definitely failed on the humility component, and I would agree with you. Like I said, when I look at it, 48 kids at a time, so that keeps me humble, but trying to bring that to this is what I think helps keep CAEP humble.
Yeah, I would like to emphasize that as well around, I believe that we have to change the focus. So your question is, how are states serving CAEP? How is CAEP serving the states? My question would be, how are both serving children? And how are the standards and the components and all of the work that we're doing collectively as a field serving children, especially those who are most underserved? And so I think it's really about changing the question.
And I'm going to echo what everybody's saying up here. It's about listening to what the field is saying and the EPPs are saying, right? That's why that having this type of workshop and hearing from, what the questions that you have to ask, that's going to be something that we're going to reflect on and then, see in what direction that's going to move the board and the discussions that we're going to have around. I'm going to bring this up in June to our board, right? Arrogant humility, right? Somebody said that in our workshop when board of directors are sitting in front of us. What does everybody else think about that? What are their responses to it? And how can we move forward with, with CAEP using that idea?
Hi, I'm Dr. Jeanette Jones. I'm with American Intercontinental University, and I had an ulterior motive for coming to this presentation because I wanted to learn more about how the structure is. So thank you for that. I appreciate the information. So I wanted to confirm something and get your guidance as a board. So you mentioned there's 3 governing bodies, and then you focused on the role of the board. And you mentioned standards, strategic planning, and scope. And so my situation is, you have talked about the language, common interpretation, common scope. So our situation is a question on language and interpretation, and we have been through the council. We both have very strong evidence, and we're kind of at a stalemate in that we have a temporary work forward. But we, as an EPP, are not satisfied. We believe we have a research definition that completely supports our request. The council feels like they have a research position. It's not an accreditation issue. It's not a site visit issue. It's a language interpretation issue. So, in what you explained what you do is my next step to come to the board, because it is a language and interpretation issue, not an accreditation or site visit.
So I know AIU, hi, Jeanette. So I know the situation. Their concern is scope over advanced programs, and the scope currently requires endorsement or licensure in the end. It's a narrower scope. It's one in which the board was very thoughtful after receiving feedback from the field on many people wanting that not to be broad in terms of its interpretation. And I know that AIU has certainly been seeking to work with a couple states, and you have one in process. We feel like that's the best way to resolve that, of course, is to complete the process in Illinois. You know, again, these are not done in isolation. To think about how, why, and how. The whole purpose of accreditation for us was served on the K-12 learner, which is why we're going for a licensure endorsement, versus you know, credits of continuous improvement hours. And that's, you know, that's why the board ended up where it did. Yeah. So the next step of what you're working currently with Gary, I know Gary Railsback, you should continue to do that in terms of getting approval for proceeding. That's how I would recommend. Okay. And I don't know if
before it comes to the board, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Over here.
So actually, if I can pull us back and just do another couple questions with the panel, and then we'll open it up to the floor again, if that sounds good to everyone. So I will definitely remember that you're back there. So the next question I have for the panel is, if you could share one thing with the audience about CAEP accreditation, and I know there's actually been a lot of thought shared already, what would it be? And Maria, if I can start with you.
Thank you. So I have a session coming up right next door, and my title is about leading CAEP accreditation with your corazón versus compliance. So leading with your heart versus compliance. I'm not saying there's not a bunch of compliance. There is. You definitely have to meet the standards, right, and provide evidence. But I'm saying, how should you lead the process? And for us at the University of Denver, it was all around our mission. And Dean Gallagher actually talked about us at the opening session around how does your work align with your mission. Dean Gallagher talked about having to revise their mission. Well, for us, our mission is to prepare equitable and excellent teachers who serve children and their full development. And so how does CAEP accreditation help us drive that? You have to be really passionate about your program and really passionate about what you believe in your mission, because the CAEP accreditation, it's challenging, right? And it takes work and effort. And so for us, it was, how can we drive our mission? How can we get more resources? How can we look for improvement? All in service of the children that we want to serve, right? Not just in how we're preparing teachers, but in who they're serving. So we really led with our corazón, with our heart, around what are we passionate about? What do we believe in? How do we leverage CAEP and the standards and the components and all of this work to really help us move that forward? And I think that's something that I really want to emphasize around, you know, lead with your mission, and then accreditation will come.
The one thing that I wanted to share was I just hope the kind of data and reflection that you're doing for the CAEP accreditation would be something that you would continue to do or would be doing even if you weren't going through accreditation, because that reflection piece and data analysis is so important because of the product that you're producing at each of your EPPs, because they're directly impacting our future. Because what you're producing is that teacher in front of the student, and they're going to be in front of that student, you know, in California from, you know, about 185 days of the year.
All right, so the next question I have, Maria and Kim, both of you in earlier comments mentioned continuous improvement. So as we all know, continuous improvement is one of CAEP's strategic plan goals, and it's featured heavily throughout the standards. Can you speak a little bit to what continuous improvement means to you, Kim, if you want to start?
Sure. Like I said, you know, as a teacher, I'm a reading specialist, and I have been for, you know, pretty much all of my career, even when that wasn't my sole job. So I came from the world of figure out where your student is, figure out where your student needs to be, you divide that up by the amount of time you have, and then you get to work. And I think that's the way I still envision continuous improvement is, where am I, where do I need to be, and what do I have to do to get there? One thing that I think is important for people to understand, though, is it's not like this, I'll do this from your direction, it's not like this linear thing, right? Like, I'm not going to expect that I'm going to get the same amount of growth out of my students every single day, just like you're not going to get the same amount of continuous improvement out of your program every single day. The further behind your student is, the more urgent it is that you make progress faster, right? So if I have a student who is in 9th grade who reads at a 3rd grade level, I can't just divide that up. Well, first of all, realistically, am I going to get that child to grade level? Maybe not. So I have to define what my real target is and think about what I need to do every single day to get us there. But you know, it needs to be more like that, right? I need to get a lot done quickly and then realize that as I get closer and closer to my goal, it may get a little bit harder. What I can't do is be satisfied with a little bit of growth every single day. I can't make teeny tiny incremental baby steps each day and think that that counts as continuous improvement. It is continuous and it is improvement, but at that trajectory, I'm never going to get the child where the child needs to be. And I think for institutions, that's important to understand, that when people are looking at your evidence and you're talking about your continuous improvement, it has to take into consideration where you started. I don't think anyone reviews cases expecting that the amount of change is going to be, there's no amount of change that you have to make to meet the standard. I'll put it like that. That's why real life people look at the information, and that's why it's important for you to make your case in your documents that you are continuously improving. We fully understand that that doesn't always mean that things get better. Sometimes you try a new assessment and it doesn't do what you want it to do and you change it again. That's still continuous improvement. So all you have to do is explain that that's what happened, and I think that everybody's cool with that. But like I said, so for me, I think it does have to do with going in the right direction, talking about and recognizing the trajectory that you need to be on to achieve the goal, which would be to meet the standard.
So I'm going to give an example in our school of what continuous improvement means. First of all, we, as I mentioned earlier today in the opening, we have, as a university, we're in an initiative on equity, diversity, opportunity, and access. And each school had to create a diversity, we created a diversity task force, and we all had to create a 5-year strategic plan around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we did that. We spent, I had a small group put together. It was faculty, staff, students, alumni, and we put together a very comprehensive strategic plan with outcomes and in lots of areas. And one of the things we said we wanted to be was that we wanted to graduate from our program. We're only at the graduate level. We only have master's and doctoral programs. We wanted to graduate educators who reflected the diversity of the K-12 schools in California. If you look overall at both the university and at the School of Ed, we are very diverse. No one race or ethnicity is in the majority. But then we said, well, we need to know baseline. Where are we? So each program had to identify, among other things, the racial and ethnic diversity of the students that we admitted last fall. That was our baseline. And then we would be following them through the program. Our programs all have defined like a year and a half teacher ed program, a 3-year doctoral program, and so on. So in teams within each program, they went about identifying the race and ethnicity of the students that they admitted last fall, so that we could see how does each program reflect what the California diversity looks like. And one program that I want to talk about realized that they were probably the one program that was 75% white and 80% female. So, they knew it on a daily basis in their classes, but they realized that they were not, we weren't recruiting. We're a private university, we're tuition dependent, so we were looking, it's important to us that we admit students who, among other things, can finish the program and go off and make a difference. So that was actually quite shocking to the faculty, because they're the ones that are admitting the students, and yet they had to admit that on their individual basis, they were making individual decisions, but collectively, they weren't, in terms of race and ethnicity, we weren't doing what we espoused. The other is that as we went back and looked for previous years, we realized that students of color were not finishing at the same rate as white students. That was very disturbing. And we don't know why. We're in the process of doing that. So we know that we aren't where we want to be in this particular program, where we say we want to be. We have to figure out how do we recruit the students we want, get them admitted, and then once they're in our program, how do we make sure that they are finishing at the same rate as other students, when in fact there is no, what's going on here? So that's, to me, an example of continuous improvement, that if we had not stated, here's what we want, and we had to have a baseline year, we would not have known what we need to do. We could have just kept saying, hey, overall, look at the School of Ed. We're very diverse. So that's, to me, a part of continuous improvement. It's admitting, we have uneven condition right now. What are we going to do to make it match what we say we're trying to do?
So I'm going to keep us moving, if that's okay. So Chris, there's a couple of questions about state agreements. Can you speak to the state relationships with CAEP?
Yep. So we're getting some questions on the app, and we're trying to be, responsive to that. So the only other thing I was going to say about continuous improvement is just that we also have a strategic planning process, and we're actually evaluating our employees, and I'm being evaluated based on the outcomes on that strategic planning process. So state agreements. One of the questions we got on the app is, what's the impact of CAEP in negotiating with the state about an agreement when EPPs in the state are up for review? That's okay. So our relationship is with the EPP when they come in at that point in time. So if there is no state agreement, we're working directly with the provider. And if the state agreement's in process, we'll make sure the providers know if there's any requirements from the state. And that's part of why we do agreements, is to make it more clear within a state of how that review process works. We also, one of the reasons the state may want to do this is because they'll use data that we collect from EPPs as part of the accreditation in their own process. So a state agreement lays out different models. Some states like to do a concurrent visit, some like to do it jointly, and some want CAEP just to take it and do it and then provide them with the information. So that's one of the things that's articulated. The other thing is whether a state wants to use a specialized professional association. So Indiana, for example, all providers in that state are required to go through SPA process, and that's articulated in the agreement. Other states, that's not the case. That may be an option. Some states may not want it as an option. So we also try to leverage and help EPPs in the agreement process in talking and resolving things around what data instruments might be used. So some states like to articulate that. Some states have their instrument reviewed as another means of demonstrating compliance with 3.2 or Standard 4. So that's another thing that can occur as part of that agreement in terms of alignment of CAEP standards with what's available in the state or the district data that's available. So I tried to cover there are a few questions on the app, but if you need more on that, let me know.
Great. I also want to flag, I noticed there was a question on the app regarding diversity. I don't think we're going to have time to get to it, but however, I would encourage you to attend the Infusing Equity and Excellence Across the CAEP Standards session if you are interested in that issue. I know Maria is on that panel, and I think, so that is in, Chicago C, so right next door. So if you are interested in that issue, I would actually encourage you to go to that panel, because I think
But Rhea, good for folks to know, we have one of the standing committees of the board is Diversity and Equity Committee. We also have an action plan, which is one of those things that requires annual measures around that plan for diversity and equity. So it's something the board has spent a lot of time on. So.
All right, one last question.
Yes, so I'm from the state of Nebraska, and we work together with the other teacher preparation programs, or EPPs, and our state pretty well. And there is something that we had NCAEP accreditation, and we're continuing with CAEP. And there were people in other EPPs who were saying to us, not a lot, but a few, why are you bothering with CAEP? They don't know what they're doing anyway. Again, reflecting the rocky start that someone mentioned early on. And I sat here and I said, I know what I can go back and say to my president and everybody else why we're doing this. But what are you doing to beyond meetings like this to kind of disseminate who are we and what are we about? And yes, we know what we're doing. We're working on this regularly. One other thing, some people are concerned. They feel like there is still inconsistency with visiting teams, and it all depends on which team you get, what you will get dinged for, and what are we doing to kind of make sure that that consistency is maintained.
Yeah. I'll take a first stab at that, and Kim probably want to address it from the Accreditation Council too. So a number of things, and I think the rocky start you heard referred to was the fact that you were merging two very different cultures in accreditation within CAEP and TEAC. The board spent a lot of time in thinking about a uniform process and how that should look, and I think has taken us around the bend in terms of that confusion. So each one of those and each time period in which people entered required different guidance, thus led to a lot of confusion in the field. That's all now have been addressed through a uniform process, but we're constantly evaluating everything we do, including the training of our volunteers, in trying to ensure, and we do a new training every summer, and then we're going to augment with everyone who's out there, whatever new aspects of the training we need. That's occurring in July of every year, where we're bringing the reviewers in to make sure up to date. And one of the key pieces of this is our lead team reviewers. So they're key in making sure of consistency among teams. And then we do the double process through the Accreditation Council, and I'll punt to Kim on that, where you've got two different panels looking at the same information to try to ensure this is done thoroughly, that everyone's looking at the evidence, and that then the Accreditation Council on top of that is deciding. So those are some checks and balances in the system that hopefully will give people more confidence, but I think we're also recording, now that we have 100 people through the process, we're trying to record some of those experiences, disseminate those. It's good to talk to people who've been through it, and a number of them are talking about, well, this wasn't, as bad as I thought, and this made sense, and this helped us towards our goals. So we're trying to make sure that information is also disseminated. But it's a great question. Kim, if you want to.
You might talk about your going out to, like you were just out in California talking to.
Yeah, we'll go. Sure, I was in Sacramento last week, and the group of deans there will travel around to hear their concerns and talk to them about how to approach this, and again, to listen around the approaches. And oftentimes, the state people were also attending that meeting. It's great when we get the state and the deans in the same room talking about this. Again, we've got nothing to hide here. We want this to be a process that's meaningful and valuable to all parties involved. And where there are barriers, we try to help think those through within states. And we're happy to do that with any state. So
That's one of the things that I've tried to do in the last year or so, is go out to where more people are and where different folks are. And a lot of state people, depending on how your state's organized, Many state folks are involved in NASTEC, National Association of State Directors of Teacher Education and Certification. So we've encouraged staff, whether I'm there as, as involved in the Accreditation Council or staff are there, to talk about the way things operate, just to give them information so that they can understand it a little bit better. Depending on how your state is organized and who does which jobs, they may be all over that and involved with that with accreditation on a daily basis, or it may be something they think about on occasion. The National Conference on Student Assessment will be there this summer. That's a CCSSO conference. We'll be talking about the importance of data collection, data sharing with EPPs, et cetera. So little things like that I think that just sort of get CAEP out there are helpful to people who've been entrenched in other systems. As far as the way the Accreditation Council operates, as Chris said, we have an initial panel, they look at information, then we have another panel that looks at it. I do think that we're looking to continuously improve the way we do that and make sure that we don't sort of bleed one into the next, and that we really do use more of a dual review situation. And then it comes to the entire council. Sometimes I think what people mean when they say it depends on what happens as to what you get dinged on, that may be based on their impression of their own program sometimes and what they're proudest of, or something that may not necessarily be at the level that they perceive it to be, because they worked really, really hard on it, but it still isn't where it needs to be. And yes, they may get dinged on that even though they tried hard. And so I think sometimes there's a little bit of that going on. But I will fully say that we understand that we have to continue our own training and preparation. Last summer, David Rock, who, as Karen mentioned, is the vice chair of the Accreditation Council and is the dean at Ole Miss, he attended all of the site visitor training. I attended all of the site visitor training. Another board member attended that. So we could be sure that what we are doing is what we are currently training our site visitors to do, so there's no confusion. I mean, I was trained a long time ago, and things have changed. Things have evolved. We've continuously improved. And I don't want anyone to like think that because things change, that's it's bad and now they don't know what they're doing. We're improving. We're trying to practice what we preach, and we have to go back and retrain to make sure that we're all coming at things in the same way. So if there is a situation where someone thinks that they have something that's truly, that cases weren't handled similarly, there is an appeals process that comes back through the Accreditation Council through another body, so it's not just reviewed by the same people. So there is a process for appealing that, but I think the most important thing is for people to understand that of course we want to be consistent. I mean, what would we want any more than to make perfectly consistent decisions every time? That's our goal, and that's what we're working toward. And when people have concerns, let us know so we can address whatever it is that isn't working out from your perspective the way you would like it to. And I can't say that we can address every single thing, but we will certainly try, and we'll address those that are affecting our outcomes.
So we're over time on the end of our session. I just wanted to make sure folks knew that, because right. So I want to thank members of the panel for coming, and for all of you. And we're happy to stay around or even step outside a little bit if some of you have additional questions for us. Thank you for coming and for being here. We appreciate it very much.